Before we begin this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss out on the most compelling royal stories that everyone is talking about. The footage was grainy, captured by a security camera positioned high in the corner of the palace corridor. Nobody was supposed to see it. In fact, most people didn't even know these particular cameras existed in this section of the royal residence. But on that crisp autumn morning in October 2019, the camera recorded something that would send shockwaves through royal circles for years to come. Sarah Mitchell had worked as a palace security analyst for 12 years. Her job was simple yet crucial: review security footage, note any irregularities, and report potential threats. Most days were monotonous. Endless hours of empty hallways, staff members going about their duties, and the occasional royal family member walking from one room to another. Nothing exciting ever happened on her watch. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Sarah sat in the dimly lit security room, her third cup of coffee growing cold beside her keyboard. She fast-forwarded through footage from the previous evening, watching digital timestamps fly by on the screen. Then something made her stop. She rewound the footage and pressed play at normal speed. The timestamp read 6:47 p.m. The corridor was one of the private wings, off-limits to tourists and rarely used except by senior members of the royal family. Sarah leaned closer to her monitor, her heart beginning to race as she watched three figures enter the frame. Princess Anne walked with her characteristic purposeful stride. Wearing a navy blazer and pearls, she was heading toward the library, a stack of folders tucked under her arm. From the opposite direction, Meghan Markle appeared, dressed casually in dark trousers and a cream sweater. She seemed to be walking quickly, her expression difficult to read on the grainy footage but clearly focused on something ahead. What happened next occurred so quickly that Sarah had to rewind it 3 times to fully process what she was seeing. As the two women approached each other in the hallway, Meghan suddenly changed direction, moving directly toward Princess Anne. There was no smile, no gesture of greeting. The body language was tense, purposeful. Princess Anne stopped walking. Even through the silent footage, Sarah could sense the shift in atmosphere. Meghan appeared to be speaking, gesturing with her hands. Princess Anne's posture remained rigid, her chin slightly raised. Whatever was being said, it wasn't a pleasant conversation. Then the third figure entered the frame. A royal protection officer, a tall man Sarah recognized as James Thornton, moved swiftly from his position near the doorway. He didn't run, but his movement was decisive and quick. Within seconds, he had positioned himself directly between the two women, his back to Princess Anne facing Meghan. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. In all her years reviewing security footage, she had never seen a protection officer intervene in an interaction between two members of the royal family. These officers were trained to be invisible, to blend into the background, to only step forward in cases of genuine physical threat. So why had James Thornton felt the need to place himself between a princess and a duchess? The footage continued for another 47 seconds. Meghan stood frozen, her hands still raised mid-gesture. James remained in position, his stance protective but professional. Princess Anne said something brief, then turned and continued walking down the corridor as if nothing had happened. James stayed where he was until Princess Anne disappeared through the library door. Only then did he step aside, allowing Meghan to pass. She stood there for a moment longer before turning and walking back in the direction she had come from, her movements sharp and quick. Sarah sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Protocol dictated that she'll report any unusual security incidents to her supervisor. But was this a security incident? Or was it a private family matter that she had accidentally witnessed? She chewed her lip, staring at the frozen frame on her screen showing James Thornton's protective stance between the two royal women. Before she could decide what to do, her supervisor, Margaret Chen, entered the security room carrying a tablet and looking stressed. Margaret was a veteran of palace security, a woman who had seen everything and rarely showed emotion. But today, her face was tight with concern. "Sarah, I need you to pull footage from Corridor C7 from yesterday evening," Margaret said without preamble. "Time frame between 6:30 and 7 p.m. Sarah felt her stomach drop. I'm actually looking at footage from that corridor right now, she said carefully. Is there something specific I should be looking for? Margaret hesitated, then closed the door to the security room. She pulled up a chair next to Sarah, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. There's been a complaint filed. I can't tell you who filed it or what it's about, but I need you to document everything you see in that footage. Every detail. Timestamps, individuals present, actions taken. This is going to go to the highest levels. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she moved her mouse to restart the footage. I've already seen it, she admitted. The interaction between Princess Anne and the Duchess of Sussex, and James Thornton stepping between them. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. Then you understand why this is sensitive. What you witnessed could change everything people think. They know about what really happened during Meghan's time in the royal family. Make your report detailed and factual. No speculation, no interpretation. Just what the camera shows. As Sarah began typing her official report, she couldn't help but wonder what had been said in that corridor. What words had passed between Princess Anne and Meghan Markle that required a trained protection officer to physically intervene? And more importantly, why were royal insiders so desperate to keep this footage hidden from the public eye? James Thornton had protected members of the royal family for 17 years. He had stood guard during state dinners, accompanied royals on international tours, and maintained his professional composure through countless challenging situations. But nothing in his training had prepared him for what happened that October evening in Corridor C7. The day had been long and tense. James had been assigned to Princess Anne's detail for the week, covering for a colleague who was on leave. Princess Anne was known among protection officers as a dream client. She was punctual, predictable, and required minimal intervention. She treated her security team with respect but maintained appropriate professional distance. James appreciated working with her. No drama, no complications. That evening, Princess Anne had mentioned she needed to retrieve some documents from the library. Before a charity board meeting the following morning, James had walked the route ahead of her, checked the corridor, and given the all-clear. It was supposed to be a simple 5-minute task. He was positioned near the library entrance when he saw Meghan Markle approaching from the east corridor. Something about her body language immediately put him on alert. Her pace was quick, her shoulders set with determination. She wasn't casually strolling. She was on a mission. James had worked enough royal events to recognize tension when he saw it. The relationship between various family members had been strained for months. Staff whispered in corners. Meetings ran long behind closed doors. There was an atmosphere of unease that permeated the palace walls. And now, watching Meghan change direction to intercept Princess Anne, James felt his professional instincts kick into high gear. Princess Anne noticed Meghan's approach and stopped walking. James couldn't hear the initial exchange from his position. He moved closer, maintaining his professional distance while staying alert. Then Meghan's voice rose, sharp and clear in the quiet corridor. You've been poisoning them against me from the start, Meghan said, her American accent crisp with anger. Every family dinner, every public event. You sit there with your comments, your little observations. You think I don't notice? James saw Princess Anne's expression remain impassive, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped her folders more tightly. I have no idea what you're talking about, Princess Anne replied, her voice controlled but cold. Perhaps if you spent less time imagining conspiracies and more time learning your duties, we wouldn't be having this conversation. That's when Meghan stepped forward, closing the distance between them. It wasn't aggressive exactly, but it was confrontational, crossing into Princess Anne's personal space. James made his decision in a fraction of a second. His training was clear: protect the principal, de-escalate the situation, avoid creating a scene unless absolutely necessary. He moved swiftly, positioning himself between the two women. His back was to Princess Anne, his face calm and professional as he looked at Meghan. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a clear message. This conversation was over. Meghan looked shocked, then furious. You can't be serious, she said, looking past James to Princess Anne. You're actually hiding behind security now. Princess Anne's voice came from behind him, steady and measured. This conversation is inappropriate and unproductive. I suggest we both take some time to reflect on what's truly important here, which is our duty to the family and the crown. Good evening. Meghan. James heard Princess Anne's footsteps as she walked past him into the library. He remained in position, maintaining eye contact with Meghan, his expression neutral. He could see the conflict playing across her face: anger, frustration, embarrassment, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Hurt, perhaps. After a long moment, Meghan took a step back. "This family," she said quietly, more to herself than to James. "This whole damn family." Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor. James waited until she had disappeared around the corner before he allowed himself to exhale. His heart was pounding. In 17 years of protection work, he had never had to physically intervene between two members of the royal family. He had just crossed a line that most officers never even approached. He entered the library where Princess Anne was standing by the window, her folders forgotten on a nearby table. She looked older suddenly, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "I'm sorry you had to witness that," she said without turning around. "And I'm sorry you had to step in. That must have been quite uncomfortable." "I was doing my job, Your Royal Highness," James replied. "Ensuring your safety and well-being is my only concern." Princess Anne finally turned to face him. "What you saw and heard stays between us. I don't need to tell you how delicate things are right now. The family is under enough scrutiny without adding fuel to the fire." "Of course, ma'am. I understand completely." But even as James assured Princess Anne of his discretion, he knew the situation was more complicated than she realized. Security cameras had been upgraded throughout the palace 6 months earlier. High-definition cameras with excellent audio and visual capabilities, installed in corridors that previously had only basic coverage. He had no idea if the cameras in Corridor C7 were active, but if they were, his intervention had been recorded. Princess Anne collected her folders and left the library, her composure fully restored. James followed at the appropriate distance, his mind racing. He would have to file an incident report. That was protocol. But how detailed should it be? Should he mention the confrontation, or simply note that he maintained his protective position during a private conversation? Later that evening, back in the security officer's break room, James sat with his report half-written on his tablet. His colleague, Marcus, noticed his troubled expression. Marcus asked, pouring himself tea. James hesitated. The oath of confidentiality was sacred among royal protection officers. They saw and heard things that could destroy reputations, end marriages, or spark constitutional crises. The ability to keep silent was perhaps the most important qualification for the job. "Just a complicated situation," James finally said. "Nothing I can discuss." Marcus nodded, understanding immediately. "Those are the worst kind. The ones that make you question whether you did the right thing, even when you know you followed protocol perfectly." That was exactly it. James had followed his training to the letter. He had protected his principal from a potentially volatile confrontation. He had maintained professionalism and discretion. But as he finished his incident report, keeping the details deliberately vague, he couldn't shake the feeling that this evening's events would have consequences far beyond what anyone could predict. He submitted the report and went home, trying to forget the look on Meghan's face when he had stepped between her and Princess Anne. He had no way of knowing that. His actions would become the subject of intense scrutiny at the highest levels of palace management, or that the footage of those 47 seconds would become some of the most closely guarded evidence of the real story. Behind the royal family's fracturing relationships, Charlotte Webb had worked in the palace communications office for 8 years, and she had learned one fundamental truth: secrets in the royal household never stayed buried forever. They might be contained, managed, or carefully reframed, but they always found a way to surface. The footage from Corridor C7 was about to prove that rule once again. 3 days after the incident, Charlotte was called into an emergency meeting with Sir Michael Ashford, the senior communications advisor to the royal family. These unscheduled meetings were never good news. They usually meant a scandal was brewing, a story was about to break. or damage control was urgently needed. Sir Michael's office was elegant but intimidating, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and portraits of previous advisors dating back to centuries. He sat behind his mahogany desk, his expression grave as Charlotte took her seat across from him. "We have a situation," he began, without preamble. "I need you to understand that what I'm about to share with you cannot leave this room. You'll be required to sign an additional confidentiality agreement before we proceed." Charlotte's stomach tightened. She had signed confidentiality agreements before, but never mid-employment. Never for something that required this level of secrecy. She nodded and signed the document Sir Michael slid across the desk. He turned his computer monitor to face her. "This footage was recorded 4 days ago. We only became aware of its existence yesterday when a routine security review flagged an incident report filed by Protection Officer James Thornton." Charlotte watched the silent footage play out. Even without audio, the confrontation was clear. The body language spoke volumes. Meghan's aggressive approach, Princess Anne's defensive posture, and then the protection officer stepping decisively between them. Charlotte had worked with enough royal footage to understand what she was seeing. This was bad. Really bad. "The audio is worse," Sir Michael said, pulling up a second file. "We've had the technical team enhance it. Listen carefully." Charlotte listened to Meghan's accusation about being poisoned against by Princess Anne. Cold response and the abrupt ending. When the audio finished, she sat back in her chair, processing the implications. "How many people have seen this?" she asked. "Currently?" 6. The security analyst who first discovered it. Her supervisor, James Thornton himself, the head of palace security, myself, and now you. "We're keeping the circle extremely tight. Does the family know?" Sir Michael's expression darkened. "Her Majesty has been briefed. She's requested that the footage be preserved but restricted. No copies, no leaks, no discussions outside of essential personnel. She's made it clear that this stays internal." Charlotte understood the subtext. The Queen wanted the evidence secured but didn't want it used. Not yet, anyway. Perhaps not ever. But having it meant having leverage, having truth, having protection against future accusations or revisionist history. Charlotte asked. "This seems like a security matter, not a communications issue." Sir Michael leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "Because rumors are already starting to circulate. Someone always talks, even when they shouldn't. We're getting whispers from staff members who weren't even present. The story is already evolving, becoming distorted. By next week, we'll likely have some version of this reaching the tabloids. I need you to develop a strategy for how we handle it when it does." Charlotte's mind raced through possibilities. Deny everything? Confirm, but minimize? Blame it on stress and misunderstanding? Each approach had risks. "What's the official position if we're asked directly?" she questioned. "We maintain that private family matters remain private. We don't confirm, we don't deny. We express disappointment at speculation about internal family dynamics." "The standard approach?" "That won't be enough," Charlotte said carefully. "Not with what's been happening over the past year. The media is watching every interaction between Meghan and the family. If they get even a hint that a protection officer had to physically intervene in a confrontation, they'll run with it for weeks." Sir Michael nodded grimly. "I know, which is why we need to be prepared with something stronger. Not a denial, but a reframe." What actually happened in that corridor? Charlotte understood what he was really asking. What narrative could they construct that was technically true but less damaging? She watched the footage again, looking for alternative interpretations. "James Thornton was doing his job," she said slowly. "Protecting Princess Anne, from the footage alone, without context. Someone could argue he was simply maintaining appropriate security protocols. The conversation could have been getting heated. He stepped in to prevent escalation. That's what protection officers do." "Keep going," Sir Michael encouraged. Meghan could argue she was trying to address legitimate concerns about her treatment in the family. Princess Anne could argue she was simply ending an inappropriate confrontation. Both could be telling their truth. The protection officer becomes the neutral party who prevented the situation from getting worse. Sir Michael considered this. The problem is the optics. A white protection officer stepping between a biracial woman and a white princess. In the current climate, that image alone tells a story, regardless of context. Charlotte hadn't thought of it that way, but Sir Michael was right. The visual was problematic on multiple levels. It could be interpreted as the institution physically blocking Meghan, silencing her, or protecting itself at her expense. No amount of explanation would change how that image would be received by certain audiences. Then we can't let the footage get out, Charlotte said firmly. If it leaks, we lose control of the narrative entirely. Our best strategy is prevention. Tighten security around the evidence. Find out who's talking and stop them. Make it clear that anyone who discusses this will face serious consequences. Already done, Sir Michael replied. But here's what worries me. Meghan and Harry are becoming increasingly isolated from the family. If they decide to leave, if they decide to tell their story publicly, this incident could become part of their narrative. They could frame it as evidence of mistreatment, of the family turning against Meghan. We need to be prepared for that possibility. Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard the rumors like everyone else. Harry and Meghan were unhappy. They were considering options. Some said they wanted to step back from royal duties. Others whispered about a complete break. If this footage became ammunition in a public battle between the Sussexes and the institution, the damage would be catastrophic. Do we know what Meghan's version of events is? Charlotte asked. Has she filed any kind of complaint? Sir Michael pulled out another document. She submitted a written complaint to HR 3 days after the incident. She claims Princess Anne has been systematically undermining her since she joined the family. She alleges hostile behavior, exclusion from family decisions, and what she describes as aggressive confrontation in Corridor C7. She's requested a formal mediation process. Charlotte read through the complaint, her concern growing with each paragraph. Meghan's account was detailed, emotional, and damaging. Whether it was accurate or not almost didn't matter. If this became public, it would fuel every existing narrative about Meghan being mistreated by the royal family. She's declined to engage with the formal complaint process. She maintains that her conversation with Meghan was a private family matter and that involving HR is inappropriate. She's suggested that if Meghan has concerns about family dynamics, they should be addressed through family channels, not institutional processes. In other words, Charlotte thought, Princess Anne was refusing to play by Meghan's rules. The two women were at an impasse, and the institution was caught in the middle, holding footage that could vindicate one side or condemn the other, depending on how it was interpreted. This is going to explode, Charlotte said quietly. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. And when it does, that footage is either going to be our greatest asset or our biggest liability. We need to decide now which it's going to be. Sir Michael closed the files on his computer and looked at Charlotte with tired eyes. Her Majesty has made her wishes clear. The footage stays locked away. We manage the situation quietly. We prevent escalation. We protect the institution. Charlotte nodded, but as she left Sir Michael's office, she couldn't shake the feeling that protecting the institution might require sacrificing the truth. And in an age of social media, activism, and demands for transparency, she wasn't sure that was a strategy that would work anymore. Rebecca Foster had been Princess Anne's private secretary for 6 years, and in that time, she had developed a deep respect for the princess's work ethic, dedication, and no-nonsense approach to royal duties. But she had also learned that beneath Anne's controlled exterior was a woman who cared deeply about her family and the institution she had spent her entire life serving. The morning after, Rebecca learned about the footage. She found Princess Anne in her private office at Gatcombe Park. Working through correspondence with her usual efficiency, the princess looked up as Rebecca entered, immediately sensing that something was wrong. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Princess Anne said, setting down her pen. "The security footage." Rebecca nodded, closing the door behind her. "Sir Michael showed it to me yesterday. He wanted me to understand the full context before we discuss how to move forward." Princess Anne rose from her desk and walked to the window overlooking her estate's grounds. For a long moment, she was silent, her posture rigid with tension. I didn't handle it well, Anne finally said. I should have simply walked away when I saw her approaching. I knew she was upset. I knew the confrontation was coming. But I let my frustration get the better of me. What happened before that evening? Rebecca asked gently. What led to the confrontation? Princess Anne turned from the window, her expression weary. We had a family dinner 3 days earlier. Meghan made several comments about how the institution was stuck in the past, how things needed to change, how her ideas were being dismissed without consideration. She wasn't entirely wrong, but her delivery was confrontational. She seemed to think that because she had experience in entertainment and media, she knew better than people who had spent decades in royal service. And you responded? I pointed out that there were reasons for certain protocols. That change must come carefully, with consideration for history and consequence. She took it as a personal attack. She accused me of being resistant to change, of being part of the old guard that was making her life difficult. Rebecca could picture the scene. Two strong-willed women with very different perspectives on what the monarchy should be, neither willing to back down. It was a collision course waiting to happen. The dinner ended badly, and continued. Meghan left early with Harry. Over the next few days, I heard through various channels that she was telling people I had deliberately humiliated her. That was part of a coordinated effort to push her out. When I saw her in that corridor, I made the decision to address it directly. Clearly, that was a mistake. What did you say to her before the footage captured your conversation? Anne sighed. I told her that if she had concerns about my behavior, she should address them with me directly, rather than through gossip and staff complaints. She immediately became defensive. She said I had been undermining her from the beginning, making comments at family events, questioning her judgment. That's when the footage picks up our exchange. Rebecca processed this information carefully. Both women had legitimate grievances. Anne felt disrespected and misrepresented. Meghan felt attacked and excluded. The truth, as always, was probably somewhere in the middle. James Thornton stepping between you, Rebecca said. How did that feel? For the first time, Anne's composure cracked slightly. Humiliating, if I'm honest. To have a protection officer feel the need to physically intervene in a conversation with my nephew's wife. But I also understood why he did it. Meghan had moved into my personal space. Her body language was aggressive. James was doing his job, protecting me from a situation that was escalating. Do you think Meghan would have become physical? Anne considered the question. No, I don't think she would have struck me or anything like that. But the confrontation was becoming heated, and James made the judgment call that it needed to end. I'm grateful he was there, even though the optics are terrible. The optics are what concerns Sir Michael, Rebecca said carefully. That footage in the wrong context could be interpreted in ways that damage both you and the institution. Meghan could use it to support her narrative about being mistreated. The media could frame it as evidence of family dysfunction. We need to be prepared for how this might be used against us. Anne returned to her desk, her expression hardening. I will not be blackmailed by the possibility of bad publicity. I said what I said. I meant what I meant. If Meghan chooses to portray herself as a victim of a conversation where she was equally confrontational, that's her choice. But I won't apologize for defending myself and the institution. Rebecca had expected this response. Princess Anne had never been one to back down or compromise her principles for the sake of public relations. It was one of her strengths, but in this situation, it could also be a weakness. I'm not asking you to apologize, Rebecca said carefully. But I need to understand your perspective so we can prepare for various scenarios. If Meghan and Harry decide to leave the family, if they do interviews or write books, this incident will likely come up. We need to have a response ready. My response is simple, Anne said firmly. It was a private family disagreement. It was handled internally. No one was harmed. Nothing inappropriate occurred. If Meghan chooses to make it public, she'll have to explain why she was confronting me in a palace corridor in the first place. Rebecca made notes, but she was worried. Anne's straightforward approach worked well in normal circumstances, but this situation was anything but normal. The dynamics of race, gender, institutional power, and public sympathy were all at play. A simple denial or dismissal wouldn't be enough. There's something else you should know, Rebecca said. Meghan filed a formal complaint with Palace. HR. She's requesting mediation and claiming a pattern of hostile behavior from you. Anne's expression turned to ice. Hostile behavior. From me. Because I refuse to agree with everything she said and affirm every idea she had. Because I represented continuity rather than revolution. Her complaint is detailed. She mentions specific instances where she felt excluded or criticized. The corridor confrontation is cited as the culmination of months of what she describes as systematic undermining. And what does HR expect me to do? Apologize for not embracing her vision of modernizing the monarchy in her image. Submit to mediation where I'm expected to admit fault for having different views. Rebecca recognized the anger in Anne's voice, but beneath it was hurt. Anne had dedicated her life to duty and service. She had worked harder than almost any other member of the royal family, with less recognition and fewer privileges than those higher in the line of succession. To be accused of bullying or hostile behavior wounded her deeply. No one is asking you to admit fault, Rebecca said gently. But we need to find a way to de-escalate this situation before it causes permanent damage to the family and the institution. Anne was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, more reflective. I don't dislike Meghan. I don't wish her harm. But I do think she came into this family with unrealistic expectations about what her role would be and how quickly things could change. Harry indulged those expectations rather than helping her understand the reality of royal life. And now we're all paying the price for that failure to set appropriate boundaries and expectations from the beginning. You think there's any way to repair the relationship? Anne shook her head slowly. I think that ship has sailed. Meghan has made up her mind about me and about this family. Nothing I say or do now will change that. The best we can hope for is to minimize the damage when they inevitably decide to break away and tell their version of events. Rebecca felt a deep sadness at Anne's words. She had watched the hope and excitement when Harry announced his engagement to Meghan. She had seen the potential for Meghan to bring a fresh perspective and energy to the royal family. But somewhere along the way, that hope had curdled into suspicion, resentment, and now open conflict. The footage remains locked away for now, Rebecca said, but we both know that in the digital age, nothing stays secret forever. If it leaks, or if Meghan references the incident publicly, we need to be prepared. Anne nodded, returning her attention to her correspondence. Then prepare. Do what you need to do. But I will not compromise my integrity or misrepresent what happened to make this easier for anyone. The truth is the truth, whether it's convenient or not. As Rebecca left Anne's office, she couldn't help but think that both women, Anne and Meghan, believed they were defending the truth. The tragedy was that their truths were incompatible. And the footage from Corridor C7 had captured the moment when that incompatibility became impossible to ignore. Jennifer Martinez had worked as a junior staff member in the Sussex household for 8 months, and she had noticed the change in Meghan's demeanor over that time. The bright optimism that had characterized Meghan's early days in the royal family had gradually been replaced by guardedness, frustration, and something that looked very much like despair. The day after the corridor incident, Jennifer found Meghan sitting in her private office at Kensington Palace, staring out the window with red-rimmed eyes. Harry was away on a royal engagement, and Meghan was alone with her thoughts. "Can I get you anything, ma'am?" Jennifer asked softly from the doorway. Meghan turned, quickly wiping her eyes and attempting a smile. "No, thank you, Jennifer. I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. Jennifer could see that clearly. Over the past months, she had watched Meghan try so hard to fit into the royal mold while maintaining her own identity and values. It was an impossible balance, and the strain was showing. "Ma'am, if you need to talk," Jennifer said carefully, "I'm here. And I want you to know that many of us on staff see how hard you're trying. We see the work you're doing, even when it's not recognized." Meghan's carefully constructed composure crumbled. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she gestured for Jennifer to close the door and sit down. "I can't do this anymore," Meghan said quietly. "I thought I could. I thought if I worked hard enough, followed the rules, proved myself, eventually they would accept me. But it doesn't matter what I do. To them, I'll always be the outsider who doesn't belong." What happened yesterday? Jennifer asked. Though rumors had already circulated among staff about a confrontation between Meghan and Princess Anne, Meghan took a shaky breath. I tried to talk to Anne. I wanted to address some concerns directly rather than letting them fester. I thought that would be the mature, honest approach. Instead, she dismissed everything I said. She implied that I was the problem, that I needed to learn my place. And then, when I tried to continue the conversation, her protection officer literally stepped between us, like I was some kind of threat. Jennifer listened carefully, noting the pain in Meghan's voice. How did that make you feel? Humiliated? Silenced? It was like physical proof that I'm not considered an equal member of this family. They can cut me off, literally put barriers between us, and there's nothing I can do about it. Do you know what message that sends? That I'm dangerous, that I need to be contained. I'm sure the officer was just following protocol, Jennifer offered gently. Was he? Meghan challenged. Or was it because Anne signaled in some way that she wanted the conversation to end? Because I'm willing to bet that if William or Charles had approached her in that corridor, no one would have stepped between them. The rules are different for me. They've always been different. Jennifer couldn't argue with that. She had seen the double standards herself. The way Meghan's fashion choices were criticized, while Kate's were praised for identical styles. The way Meghan's initiatives were questioned while other royals' projects sailed through approval. The subtle and not-so-subtle ways Meghan was made to feel that she didn't quite measure up. Have you talked to Harry about this? Meghan's expression softened at the mention of her husband. Harry sees it. He knows what's happening. But he's caught between his family and his wife. He's trying to fix things, to make everyone happy. But it's impossible. And I hate that I'm putting him in that position. You're not putting him in any position, Jennifer said firmly. The situation is what it is. Harry chose you, and that comes with supporting you when his family makes that difficult. Meghan stood and walked to her desk, pulling out a file. I filed a formal complaint about Anne's behavior. HR is supposed to investigate, but I don't expect anything to come of it. They'll protect her. They'll say it was a misunderstanding. They'll make it my fault somehow. What exactly did you complain about? Everything. The comments at family dinners? The exclusion from decision-making. The way she questions my judgment in front of others. Yesterday's confrontation was just the final straw. I documented everything with dates and witnesses where possible. I wanted it on record that I tried to address this through proper channels. Jennifer felt a sense of foreboding. Formal complaints in the royal household rarely led to positive outcomes. More often, they marked the complainer as a troublemaker, someone who didn't understand how things worked. But she also understood why Meghan felt the need to document everything. If things continued to deteriorate, having an official record might be important. What does Harry think about the complaint? He supports it. He's furious about what happened in the corridor. He's talked to his father about it, but Charles just wants everyone to calm down and move past it. He doesn't understand that this isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern. Over the next hour, Meghan walked Jennifer through months of accumulated grievances. Some were clearly serious, being excluded from important meetings. Having her suggestions dismissed without consideration, being subjected to what Meghan perceived as racist microaggressions. Others seemed smaller, but had accumulated weight. Seating arrangements that placed her at the far end of tables. Being the last to be informed about family decisions. Subtle comments that undermined her confidence. Jennifer listened, trying to maintain objectivity. She had worked in the palace long enough to know that there were always multiple sides to every story. But she also recognized genuine distress when she saw it. Meghan was hurting, and whether every grievance was entirely justified or not, the pain was real. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Jennifer said carefully. "What do you want to happen now?" Meghan was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I want to leave. I want to take Harry and our future children and build a life where we can actually make a difference without being constantly undermined. But I also know that leaving means admitting defeat. It means letting them win. And it means Harry loses his family. Or maybe it means you and Harry create your own definition of what your royal role looks like," Jennifer suggested. Maybe there's a middle ground where you can maintain some connection to the family while having more independence. Meghan looked at her with a mixture of hope and skepticism. You think that's possible? After everything that's happened? I think Harry loves you more than he loves the institution. I think if you tell him you need to leave, he'll support that decision. And I think there are ways to step back from senior royal duties while still maintaining family relationships. If both sides are willing to try. But even as Jennifer said it, she doubted whether reconciliation was possible. The corridor footage, the formal complaints, the accumulated resentments, these things had created wounds that wouldn't heal easily. Meghan pulled out her phone and showed Jennifer a text message from a friend in California. She's asking when we're coming to visit. She doesn't understand why we can't just leave for a month, decompress, figure things out. And I can't explain to her that we're not allowed to just leave. That every trip, every appearance, every decision has to be approved. That we're not really free. Jennifer saw the trapped expression on Meghan's face and felt deep sympathy. You are free, ma'am. You always have been. It might not feel like it, but you can make choices about your life. If this situation is making you unhappy, you have the power to change it. Do I? Because it doesn't feel that way. It feels like every time I try to assert any independence or push back against unfair treatment, I'm the problem. I'm the difficult one. I'm the American who doesn't understand how things work. Jennifer didn't have easy answers. She was a junior staff member, caught between her loyalty to her employer and her recognition of a flawed system. But she knew one thing for certain. The situation was unsustainable. Something had to give. Ma'am, I'm going to tell you something that could get me fired, Jennifer said. There are people on staff who believe you're right, who think the institution needs to change, who see how you're being treated and don't think it's fair, but they're scared to speak up because that's not how things work here. Silence is safety. Conformity is survival. But maybe that's exactly what needs to change. Meghan looked at Jennifer with tears in her eyes again. Thank you for saying that. You have no idea how much it means to know that someone sees the truth. As Jennifer left Meghan's office that afternoon, she made a decision. If things continued to escalate, if Meghan and Harry decided to leave, she would tell their story from her perspective. Not to sensationalize or cause harm, but to add context to whatever public battle might unfold. The footage from Corridor C7 had captured one moment in time, but it couldn't capture the months of accumulated stress, disappointment, and hurt that had led to that confrontation. The truth, Jennifer realized, was always more complicated than a single piece of evidence could show. 2 years later, the footage still existed in a secure digital vault, known to only a handful of people and never publicly released. But its existence had changed everything. Sarah Mitchell, the security analyst who first discovered it, had since left Palace employment. She sat in her London apartment, watching yet another documentary about Harry and Meghan's departure from royal life. The narrator was speculating about what had really happened behind palace walls. What had driven the couple to make such a dramatic break, Sarah knew. She had seen it with her own eyes on a grainy security monitor. But her non-disclosure agreement was ironclad, and she had no desire to become part of the media circus that surrounded anything involving the Sussexes and the royal family. Her phone buzzed with a message from Margaret Chen, her former supervisor. They had stayed in touch, occasionally meeting for coffee to discuss their lives post-palace employment. Watching the documentary? Margaret's message read, "Strange to know what we know," Sarah typed back. "Do you ever think about whether we should have done something different?" Margaret's response came quickly, "Every day. But we did our jobs. We protected the evidence. We maintained protocol. What happened after that was beyond our control." But was it? Sarah had spent 2 years wondering whether keeping that footage secret had been the right call. It could have provided clarity, context, proof of what actually happened, versus the competing narratives that had emerged since Harry and Meghan left. In California, Meghan and Harry had built a new life. They had welcomed their children, launched their foundation, signed major deals with streaming services. But the shadow of their royal departure followed them everywhere. Interviews, documentaries, books. Everyone wanted to know the truth about what had driven them away. In one widely watched interview, Meghan had spoken carefully about feeling unsupported by the institution, about concerns over how she was treated differently. She had mentioned confrontations, feeling silenced, and the pain of being misunderstood. She never specifically mentioned Princess Anne or the corridor incident. But those who knew the truth recognized the references. Princess Anne, for her part, had maintained her characteristic silence on family matters. In the rare interview she gave, she focused on her charity work, her royal duties, and her commitment to service. When asked about family dynamics, she simply said that private matters should remain private and that she wished Harry and Meghan well in their new life. But the footage existed. Locked away, protected, preserved. And both sides knew it. James Thornton, the protection officer who had stepped between the two women, had also moved on to a different role. He rarely thought about that October evening anymore, but when he did, he still wondered if he had made the right choice. Had his intervention prevented a worse confrontation? Or had it become symbolic of a larger problem, the institution physically placing barriers between family members, unable to allow them to work through their conflicts directly? He had given several confidential debriefings over the years, always maintaining his professional objectivity. Yes, he had stepped between them. Yes, he believed it was necessary at the time. No, he didn't believe either woman had intended physical harm. It was simply a heated conversation that needed to end, and he had ended it. That was his job. Charlotte Webb, the communications officer, had risen to a more senior position within Palace Communications. She had managed countless crises since that October evening. But the corridor footage remained in her mind as a turning point. It was the moment when she realized that the old methods of managing royal scandals, silence, deflection, carefully worded denials, weren't going to work in the modern era. The public wanted transparency. They wanted authenticity. They wanted to see the real people behind the titles, with all their flaws and conflicts. The institution's instinct was to protect and conceal. But Charlotte increasingly believed that selective transparency might have prevented some of the damage that followed Harry and Meghan's departure. Rebecca Foster still served as Princess Anne's private secretary, and she had watched her employer navigate the aftermath of the Sussex departure with grace and dignity. Anne had never publicly criticized Harry or Meghan. She had never tried to justify her actions or explain her perspective. She simply continued her work, maintained her standards, and refused to engage in the public drama, but in private moments. Rebecca had seen Anne's sadness at how things had unfolded. Anne genuinely believed she had tried to help Meghan understand the realities of royal life, to prepare her for the challenges ahead. The fact that her attempts had been perceived as hostile or undermining troubled Anne deeply, even if she maintained that she had acted appropriately. Jennifer Martinez, who had witnessed Meghan's pain firsthand, had also moved on to work in the charitable sector. She followed the Sussexes' work from afar and felt vindicated by their success in building an independent platform. She had been right; they could create their own definition of meaningful work outside the constraints of the institution, but she also recognized the cost. Harry's relationship with his family was fractured. Meghan had been subjected to relentless media scrutiny and public criticism. Their children would grow up largely separate from their royal relatives. Independence had come at an enormous price. The footage remained locked away, known but unseen by the public. It had become a kind of evidence in waiting, preserved in case it was ever needed to settle disputes, correct the record, or provide context to history. But its continued secrecy also meant that speculation would continue. Narratives would remain contested, and truth would stay elusive. In the secure digital vault, the 47 seconds of footage sat unchanged. Princess Anne's rigid posture, Meghan's frustrated gestures, James Thornton's decisive intervention. A moment in time that captured a relationship breaking down, a family fracturing, and an institution struggling to adapt to changing expectations. Different people had watched that footage and seen different things. Some saw Meghan as aggressive and confrontational. Others saw her as desperate and unheard. Some saw Princess Anne as protecting institutional standards. Others saw her as rigid and unwelcoming. Some saw James Thornton as doing his duty. Others saw him as symbolizing systemic barriers to honest communication. The truth was that all of these interpretations had some validity. The footage showed what happened, but it couldn't show why. It couldn't capture the months of accumulated misunderstandings, cultural differences, and competing visions for what the monarchy should be. It couldn't show the love Harry had for both his wife and his family, or the impossible position that put him in. It couldn't show the genuine hurt on all sides, or the good intentions that had somehow led to such devastating outcomes. Sarah Mitchell thought about this as she turned off the documentary. Somewhere in a secure server, those 47 seconds of footage still existed. Maybe someday, decades from now, when everyone involved had passed and emotions had cooled, historians would analyze it as evidence of a pivotal moment in royal history. But for now, it remained hidden not because it would definitively prove one side right or wrong, but because the reality it captured was too complex, too nuanced, and too painful for public consumption. It showed what happened when strong-willed people with different perspectives and different lived experiences tried and failed to find common ground. It showed the moment when a relationship became irreparable, when bridges were burned, and when the only path forward was separation. The royal insiders didn't want anyone to see the footage, not because it would reveal a scandal, but because it would reveal something more uncomfortable, that there were no clear villains in this story. Just people trying to navigate impossible situations, making choices that seemed right at the time, and dealing with the consequences that rippled outward in ways no one could have fully predicted. In the end, the hidden camera footage remained exactly that, hidden. Not because it was too explosive to release, but because the truth it contained was too complicated to fit neatly into anyone's preferred narrative. And perhaps that was the most revealing thing about it of all.